Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm excited to talk with you about a very important and difficult topic, which is stigma and more specifically, the kinds of rejection that we might experience living with a mental health condition, and what we can do about it, and while staying resilient. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. So we're going to talk today about responding to rejection at work, at school, and at home. You can definitely feel free throughout the presentation to put your questions and comments in the chat, because I've got it open while I'm giving the presentation, and I will try to answer them as we go. And we also have the people who submitted the pre-survey questions. I've got some of those in the presentation too. So we really encourage participation. So please feel free at any time to put your questions, comments, feedback in the chat. My name is Dan Berstein. I am a mediator living with bipolar disorder. And basically, I became a mediator, which is a conflict resolution professional, because of the stigma that I had experienced with my mental illness. I often say that I think the stigmas that I've had to face with my bipolar disorder can be worse than the symptoms I've experienced. And I've been hospitalized 5 times for my bipolar disorder. So I've had my fair share of symptoms. My hope is that there are ways that we can make a lot of difficult mental health conversations not feel difficult. So that is why I do the work that I do, and why I hope to help all sorts of people on any end of the conversation have tools from the world of conflict resolution that can help them have a better outcome. So I do all different kinds of work, and you heard my bio. I won't repeat it. I will say that it has been 20 years since I was first hospitalized and diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So this year, to honor my 20th bipolar anniversary, I have this project, 20 Years Embracing Bipolar. And if you are interested, you can go to danberstein.com/20 years. And I've got a thing of 20 lessons from 20 years with a lot of resources there. I'm doing all sorts of things on this theme. And so I'm glad to be here with all of you. I have a history with NAMI New York City. I was an in our own voice speaker at NAMI New York City over a decade ago. And I was involved in a number of different programs with NAMI New York City and other NAMIs. So it's very fitting to be here now, celebrating 20 years of having bipolar disorder and doing the work that I do with NAMI. So it's great to be here with all of you. I realized I didn't say earlier, so I'll say it now. I will be preparing a handout with the resources that I mentioned in this presentation. So you'll be able to get like this link, but some others as well from that handout, and it'll be sent to everybody after. So don't feel like you have to rush to get anything copied down, because we'll be sending that handout. I also am the author of the book Mental Health and Conflicts, a Handbook for Empowerment. And you all can get a free copy of that. So originally it was $99.95 when it was published by the American Bar Association. It's being republished by DRI Press. I have the proof copy in my hands right now, basically. So it's going to be launched very soon. And if you're interested, you'll be able to get a free copy of that, and we'll have that information to come to you after this presentation as well. So the agenda today is we're going to talk about stigma. We're going to talk about rejection. We're going to talk about the 5 C's, which is a framework you can use when you think there may be stigma, and a conflict resolution approach to coping with it. And then we're going to go through some tools specifically for rejection. So let's get started and talk about stigma. What is stigma? Does anyone want to take a stab at it and put in the chat what you think stigma is? What's the definition of stigma? A lot of different people have different definitions. And I know that some of you shared some of your stigmatizing situations that you unfortunately have been dealing with as part of the pre-survey. So if you'd like, you can put your definition of stigma in the chat. I will share, my definition of what stigma means when it comes to having a mental illness. Stigma is a negative attitude. So stigma is a negative attitude that's associated with a specific characteristic. And I see some people writing in the chat, being shamed, being unfairly judged by others, attributing negative things. So that's what stigma is that it's an attitude. That attitude can turn into something that's a gesture or a comment that's inappropriate, like a microaggression. It can turn into an action like discrimination, but the stigma itself is sort of like a vibe that's in the air, an attitude that there's just this negative association. And unfortunately, it's often applied to different marginalized groups. And, we're talking about stigma associated with having a mental illness where there'll be a negative attitude attached. Now, I have an article that I put together about stigma with support from the New York State Office of Mental Health. That's in Behavioral Health News. And again, we'll get the link to you. It's called Your Options for Responding to Mental Illness Stigma Protectively, Collaboratively, or Assertively. And so we'll be drawing on some information from that article. But what I really want to point out to you is the graphic, which is we developed a social media campaign style graphic that's called Stigma Can Look Like. And I'm going to go through a few of them. So this one in the articles is stigma can look like people not inviting you to social events. The reason I wanted to create these graphics is because we hear all this talk of anti-stigma, fighting stigma, but sometimes it's hard to connect the dots of what that really means in practical day-to-day life. What does it actually translate to? Where it's great to say we hate stigma, we want to stop stigma, but what are the real things we're looking at that happen to us? And someone in the chat wrote social disapproval is one example of stigma. So one thing from the social media campaign I mentioned is stigma can look like having choices taken away from you. So that may mean that people know you have a mental illness or think you have a mental illness, and instead of letting you have control over your own life decisions, they're going to step in and make decisions that they think are best for you, or they just don't feel comfortable approaching you, so they don't give you a chance to have a decision at all. So that's an example of what to look for that might be stigma. It might be that you're losing the opportunity to make a choice when otherwise it should have been your choice. Stigma can look like an organization is not accessible to your disability needs. So some people in the questions asked about what our rights are. Well, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, we have certain rights that people should be making adjustments if we make what's called a reasonable accommodation request, so that way they can be accessible to us. If they are not making those adjustments to include you, that might be a form of discrimination, and it might be stigma. So that may be a tangible way we can know that's when something is stigmatizing. Stigma can look like people not inviting you to social events. If you're in a workplace setting and most people are getting invited to socialize afterwards together, but they're not inviting you, that could be due to a negative predisposition they have related to a mental health problem and stigma, and that may be a tangible effect of what stigma actually looks like. And stigma can look like being insulted with rude names or microaggressions. So that's another example. I think of that as one of the more common, well-known examples of if someone's calling you a name and they're calling you a slur and treating you like you're a psycho, we don't want to be around you, and they say that out loud, that is a manifestation of a stigmatizing attitude as well. That one's maybe a little bit easier to realize, oh, that seems like it's stigma. So those are some examples of, instead of just saying we don't like stigma, here's some ideas of what stigma might look like. That was the point of that campaign. The next thing I want to talk about is when these stigmatizing things happen, stigma can ripple. So there can be a ripple effect. Now, somebody wrote, I've seen stigma show up in small, quiet ways and in moments that hit hard. Sometimes it's a coworker whispering about someone losing it, or a professional assuming that a person with trauma can't handle leadership responsibility. Other times, it's the silence in the room when someone shares their mental health diagnosis, the kind that says, you're different now. I've learned that stigma isn't always loud. It can hide in tone, body language, or avoidance. When it happens, I pause and breathe before reacting. So this was one of the pre-survey submissions of questions and comments. And this was a person, pretty eloquently describing how there's so many subtle ways stigmatizing things can happen in someone's tone of voice, body language, avoidance. What's really sad to think about, and we're going to think about it in a moment, is what happens when you count up all these things. that are happening around you. All these comments, all these tone shifts, all this body language, that's how stigma can really add up to being a very uncomfortable place to be in psychologically, to realize there's all these different events. It's not just one person stigmatized me. It's, wow, I'm being affected by so many different moments, and each moment of stigma can be so challenging. And that's why this person said, I pause and breathe before reacting. So we really know it's a very challenging thing. Um, so for some reason I'm hearing an echo now. Maybe it stopped. This is an example of a single drop of stigma, a single event. So a single time someone's not invited somewhere, a single time someone makes a comment that someone may not be able to handle something because they have PTSD, like we saw in the last submission from someone in the pre-survey. Imagine that we have one single drop of stigma. Now, what happens there? So somebody asked in their pre-survey question, what are the ripple effects of rejection? So let's imagine this drop is not being invited somewhere. What's the ripple effects of that one drop of stigma? So I want to just show you a graphic that I actually normally use to show the ripple effects before this person even asked the question. So this is an example of imagining a ripple effect. Now let's start with someone's reducing or ending contact because of stigma. Okay. I just gave a presentation earlier today to a class of new social workers where I showed them a lot of details of my life and different things that I had experienced with stigma. And one of the things that happened that still affects me very deeply, it's almost been 20 years. I told somebody I had bipolar disorder. We were on our third date in her apartment. She immediately kicked me out and told me that her cousin was molested by someone with bipolar disorder. And that was the end of it. And I never saw her again. And I felt very, very horrified that, just someone knowing I have bipolar disorder meant they would associate me with that kind of thing. And that was some deep, deep stigma. So that's an example of someone reducing or ending contact. Other examples could be being kicked out of an organization, or just being gradually ghosted out of a friend group, or being in a workplace situation and having someone who just doesn't talk to you, but they talk to other people at work. So but the general idea is that rejection. So that's one event of one person rejecting us. What happens next? So let's say we're in a community with people. Well, their avoidance might create ripple effects. Let's say if we're at work, the first ripple might be that we start having self-stigma and delays. So for me, when I get a bad rejection experience, I start to really feel bad about myself and believe that I am all those negative stigmatizing ideas. That's called self-stigma. So I believe that I might think of myself as a loser, a reject, someone no one should be around. And that might get in my head. That might mean that I don't move forward because I get depressed and I have a lot of delays in my life. So that's one moment of rejection can lead to that ripple. The next ripple could be that other people start rejecting me as well. They follow suit. They could see one person reject me and just follow what they're doing. They could also notice that I don't seem as fun to be around because I'm now in that self-stigma headspace. And so regardless, these other people might follow suit. That's one ripple. Then I have another ripple here I call being marked by trauma. So now people know something happened and they may not want to approach me because they think that I'm a more complicated person because there's been some kind of drama that had occurred. So that's another ripple. And then, I might start experiencing more symptoms, the fourth ripple here, and I might start having distrust of all people. I might get nervous that I'm going to get hurt again if I talk to someone else. So I may start losing more and more relationships and opportunities for relationships. And that's the next ripple here, losing more people. So you can see just one of these events could ripple out and have very, very large impacts. And that's just one event. But unfortunately, we know that stigma is everywhere. So it's more like this, where there's constant raindrops happening of stigma. And we're walking with an umbrella, but we're surrounded by so much stigma. It's raining all the time. So it's all those, and each of those drops have all those ripples. And people who are involved with stigma often don't even realize that they're being hurtful. So a lot of people may say comments that are stigmatizing, but they mean it to be supportive. or they just don't think that there's anything of it. So we might be getting hurt by so much stigma, but not even realizing that those people don't realize what they're doing. Um, Somebody asked the question in the pre-survey, what has been the impact of constantly being impacted by the stigma regarding your mental health status, and how do you address this? So I mentioned just today, I gave this presentation where I went through tons of examples of how I've been affected by stigma throughout my life to try to help these social workers know that it's a really big problem that's affecting people and causing so much trauma. So one thing I've done to address stigma for me personally, and it's not for everyone, is I've been very open about it. I've figured out ways to have programs like this one where it's part of my professional work to share some of my lived experiences. And that helps me feel less shame because I feel like my experiences have value in connecting with others. And I've connected with so many people in so many ways. Now, sometimes that makes me seem like a high maintenance and overwhelming person who does TMI and shares too much information. So I lose some relationships by being open with my condition, but I really feel good that I have these authentic, full connections with people and that I have decided to lean into what's happening to me and accept it rather than feel a lot of shame that I carry with me from what happened. I still sometimes do get the self stigma, like I described, but by having this be part of my professional life, that's been a big part of my coping with stigma. Another thing that I do is I try to think about what's going on and not demonize the other person. That was a lesson that was hard for me to learn, but I learned it from becoming a conflict resolver. I realized everybody has their own struggles, not just me. I have this slogan I say, not everybody's bad days end in hospitalizations like mine have, but we all have bad days and we all know what it's like to feel sad or worried or overwhelmed. So that helps me cope with being stigmatized as well. I would say this is a problem we all in the human race have together, that there's stigma everywhere all the time. I'm perpetrating stigma. Today, I was talking about provider stigma amongst mental health providers and research, and that shows that some conditions are more stigmatized than others. And I listed some of the conditions that are more stigmatized. Just by me saying that, it gets people into people's heads that those conditions are the more stigmatized conditions. So I feel like I'm part of the stigma as well, and that the goal is for all of us to work together to reduce it without blaming people. And that helps me cope as well. The last thing I'll say is, this whole program is meant to help anyone who's facing stigma use some conflict resolution tools like I have to have a better result. And, I have found that by following some of the stuff in this program, I've had a fuller life that feels better for me. And I'll tell you, I'll spoil the secret right now. You know, I've learned to accept when someone's rejecting me rather than argue with it, and then go and look for other ways to connect with other people and do that as quickly as possible. And when I've done that, I keep moving, I keep filling my life with new things, and I don't end up as stuck trying to fix something that may not be fixable, unfortunately, even though I know it's wrong. And I'll talk to you more about that later as well. Now, I see in the chat someone asked, can you recommend a book about how to have a healthy social life despite a mental health diagnosis? A book about how to get support from community, family, and friends, and having a social life despite having a mental health diagnosis helps with recovery. My personal suggestion is we should just think about how to have a healthy social life and not act like it has to be despite a mental health diagnosis, because I wouldn't want to presume that having a mental health diagnosis means not having a healthy social life, and those two things are linked. We will be sharing with you some of these resources that I've developed with the New York City and New York State Office of Mental Health that are free resources. And one of them actually is all about how to get support. So we're not going to go over that in depth during this presentation, but I'll share that with you, and it actually walks you through how to seek support from people. I will think about if there's something else that I know of about having a healthy social life, with a mental health diagnosis. I will say that there's a lot of confusing guidance out there. There have been programs about how to date with a mental health diagnosis, and a lot of people recommend waiting to tell somebody that you have a mental health diagnosis because you don't want them to judge you by that diagnosis before they know you. Personally, I think that unfortunately that kind of adds a little bit of stigma by saying we have to hide the diagnosis. So whatever advice you're going to get from different kinds of guidance that's out there, I think the most important thing is to get in touch with yourself and figure out what feels best for you. So if anyone else has any other questions you want to ask as we go, please feel free to do that. So we've talked a little bit about stigma. And now let's jump into understanding a little bit about rejection and what that is before we start going into the tools for responding. So, when might rejection happen? Well, it could happen at work, at school, at home. Obviously, that's what we had in the title here. It could happen everywhere. Now, at work, rejection might mean coworkers do not answer or they have slow responses. It might mean you're left out of social conversations and events. It might mean you're seen as a difficult or a, quote unquote high conflict or undesirable person and getting extra performance reviews and people are trying to document you. It might mean you're having ignored or dismissed requests for disability accommodations or backlash when you ask for an accommodation at work. You might be screened out to be hired at all or promoted. So professionally, these are different kinds of rejection that may be happening. At school, you may have professors aren't answering messages, or they don't call on you, or they subject you to longer delays than classmates. So classmates have an easier time getting a response. A lot of universities and schools have something called the behavior response team, where if there's someone that they think is a worrisome person, they mobilize this team to figure out how to respond. And they may be treating students and staff as a threat or scary. So someone may know that you have a mental health condition and they may get nervous because there's stereotypes of danger that are sometimes associated with mental illness inappropriately. And that might lead people to contact the behavior response teams. You may have ignored or dismissed requests for disability accommodations or backlash. You may be excluded from social events by classmates. So these are some examples. And there may be more. If anyone has other examples they want to put of rejection, you can put them in the chat. At home, you may be involved in breakups, left out of plans, disparaged, blamed amongst your family. These are all different ways you might feel rejected. So now let's go into, well, what do we do if we face that stigma and rejection? What's a way we can respond to it? And that's where I'm going to come in with this model called the 5 C's. The 5 C's is a 5-step model for responding when you think there's stigma. There may or may not be actual stigma. We'll talk about that, and people asked about that. But this is a framework that I developed that combines a lot of conflict resolution best practices with just some of the practical realities of what's going on when we're facing stigma. And has really helped me to try to do this. And so I'll walk you through each of them. So the first one is clarify. Clarify whether something stigmatizing really occurred. That means we recognize that, for instance, I have times right now where I'm doing advocacy work publicly to get people to change their policies and guidance about people with mental illness. So they remove inappropriate material that may be stigmatizing and discriminatory. And professionally, in the conflict resolution world, that has led to a lot of negative reaction and backlash for me that I've had to cope with. It means that I'm also nervous all the time that some people may have a stigma toward me and not want to talk to me. And so if I don't get an answer from someone within a normal amount of time, instead of thinking, oh, that person may have a loved one who is sick, or they might be sick, or they might be busy, etc., I might start thinking to myself, this person hates me now. This person thinks I'm just, some kind of freak with my mental illness. I've lost my relationship with this person. So I may imagine that I am experiencing stigma when it might not be the case. I had that happen recently with a colleague who there's no reason I would have thought they were going to stigmatize me, but I have my own baggage. So I get nervous, and I hadn't heard from them. And it turns out there was a horrific health situation with their family. And that's why I hadn't heard from them. But in my mind, I was getting myself all ready to think that it's stigma. So this is why it's important that the first thing we do is clarify whether something stigmatizing really occurred. And that's just taking a breath, pausing, doing exactly what I just said, and remembering that you come with your own biases and your own distortions and your own sensitivities, and just ask yourself, is this definitely stigma or not? And that can be very difficult, and you may never get an answer, but that's the first step of the five C's. The second step is cope. Cope with the trauma of having experienced stigma. This, I think, is the most important of the five C's. It's something I learned in therapy fairly recently in my life. And what I learned with my therapist is my therapist said, Dan, you always jump into trying to come up with a project or fix a situation. You're not sitting with the fact that something bad already happened to you and you don't feel good about it. So we can forget if we're sitting here trying to right the wrong and complain that something wrong happened, we might forget, hey, I'm hurt. And so it's important to make that space to do whatever you normally do for self-care and do some kind of coping with the trauma of having experienced stigma. And you might say, well, wait a minute, what if there wasn't stigma? What if I did the clarify part and it turns out I decided I don't think there was stigma? Still, you should cope because the fact that we have this sensitivity and fear and baggage is stressful and painful. And so it's still important to cope either way, whether you clarify that there was or wasn't stigma. The next thing to do is collect evidence of what happened. And that just means, making sure that you've written it down somewhere because if there's a problem later, it's always better to have a record that happened at that time. What I tell people to do in general is if you're upset about something and you're not sure if it's stigma, write an email to a friend. Send it as an email to them and describe what happened and say, this is what happened today, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do. That way you have what's called a contemporaneous record. So that way you can save it. You might not do anything with it. I'm not going to talk more today about what it means to collect evidence, but you don't want to become obsessive about collecting evidence or think that you have a smoking gun on someone. But for your own peace of mind, unfortunately there's situations where people do end up having serious conflicts at work, at school, etc. And not having that evidence can really hurt them, especially if someone tries to say they have no credibility. So it's helpful to collect evidence. And again, the simple thing to do that I really recommend anyone do whenever something important's happening and you're upset, email a friend of yours and tell them all the details of what happened in the email as part of a normal email. That way you have the record of how you were feeling, what happened, and you don't have to, have any weird file or anything. The next thing is to cultivate support options and seek support. So we just saw that question from the chat. And again, people should feel free to ask more questions in the chat. One of the ideas was it's helpful to seek support. I'm going to share those support seeking resources with everybody. But it's an important thing to remember that when, if you're comfortable, you decide what feels right for you, to not live alone with the effects of what's happened here, but to build relationships with other people and seek some support. The last thing to do is to consider your rights, your options, and your limitations, and then decide the next steps. So your rights may be that, let's say you're in a workplace or school setting and they're rejecting your request for a disability accommodation. You may look into, well, do I have the right to ask them to still do it? Your options are just what you realistically feel is available to you right now. Limitations, that's important to think about. You may be sitting there thinking, gee, this is wrong. This is awful stigma. Something should be done about this. But then you may also want to say, I'm very stressed right now. And that's a big burden for me to take on. And I don't want more stress. And so that's a limitation that I'm coming at from this. Or the last time I got involved in this, I get so intense about it. It doesn't feel good for my mental health. So that's a limitation. So it may be that we go through this process of the five C's, we end on consider, and we look through stuff and we still decide, you know what, I'm not going to do anything about this, but I'm glad I thought about it. I feel like I worked through understanding my perspective more and what's happening here. And I decided, it just wasn't worth it. Or we might decide to do something. And so if we're considering, usually there's three types of responses we might end up doing. The first one is the one I just described, the protective response, where you take care of yourself. You say, you know what? I just don't want to have more stress from this. I'm gonna, be glad I did this. I have it. I have everything, settled. Um, but I'm not going to do much beyond that. And we have someone in the chat mentioning that they document encounters they're concerned about with the therapist to have it on record, and the steps they took to resolve the issue. That's a great idea. I will say, different therapists keep different amounts of records. So if you know your therapist's records are very thorough, then that's good. You could also, print something out and give the document to your therapist, then you know exactly what record was there. I actually, as part of my 20 years, I requested all of my clinical records so I could look at them, and I hadn't done that in a while. And what I saw was pretty brief notes for my therapist and my psychiatrist. So it depends on who you're going to. But that's a great idea for documenting things. And then and that's exactly fitting the protective response is you sat through it, you talked through it all, you got support from your therapist, you did your coping, you collected the evidence, then you have the records with the therapist, but you decide not to move forward, and you're going to take care of yourself. So that's one type of response. Another type of response is the collaborative response, where you decide, I'm going to talk to this person about this. Hopefully, we can work through it. Another type is the assertive response, where you may end up having a legal response. And actually, just when I turn to that slide, I see in the chat, will you recommend legal resources to help us advocate for ourselves when we experience stigma in social settings? So I will answer that question. The answer is I will show you some resources that are available to help you figure out what to do if there's stigma and discrimination. Usually, in a social setting, there's not much that you can do legally because the government doesn't really control our social lives or our family lives. In a public setting, yes, there's something you can do. So there's different things you can do in different situations. But generally speaking, when you're at work, there's certain rules. When you're at school, there's certain rules. And then when you're at a place of public business, there's different rules. And different things are easier to get help with or not. And sometimes, you know, um, even though we have certain rights, it can be very, very stressful and challenging and not work out to pursue them. So it's important to understand what I call the practical realities of those rights. But I do have information that can give you guys some help when you're looking for legal resources, and I'll show you a little bit about that in the presentation. But you'll get the handout afterwards as well. Somebody shared when my daughter was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I shared the information with work colleagues. Someone said her career is over, meaning the speaker's career. Um, uh, I may have excerpted this, so I apologize for that. I think the word bipolar shouldn't be there. But let's still look at the situation, which is and it's actually kind of perfect timing from what we were just talking about in the chat. Um, this question of, well, what can you do legally when people are doing this? If someone's saying your career is over because your loved one has a mental illness, that's called associative stigma. And there are rules about not discriminating against someone who has a disability, as well as there are times there's rules about not treating someone differently because they have a loved one they're caring for who has one. So there may be something that you can do, in response to that, or you might just document this and save it. There's a number of ways that this kind of comment can be very harmful for someone who, if you're making a case that there was stigma, but it's important to understand these can be very difficult fights to have legally. How do I know when a mental health practitioner is stigmatizing me? Um, that's called provider stigma. It is a real thing, and it can be difficult to know when a mental health practitioner is stigmatizing you. My suggestion, beyond looking at the five C's, is to, focus on figuring out specific actions that are problems, as opposed to just the question, is this stigma or is this not stigma? So we're going to talk today about a specific action of being rejected. Being rejected means you're not being included and you can't, or someone's explicitly rejecting you. Um, I'll share a story about a mental health practitioner stigmatizing. When I needed to get a new psychiatrist, about 15 years ago or so. Um, when I needed to do that, I was not being accepted by anyone I looked at from the insurance because they did not want to treat someone with bipolar disorder and they did not want to treat someone who had been hospitalized. Unfortunately, mental health providers are actually allowed to reject people based on their diagnosis because clinicians are allowed to say they specialize in some conditions but not others. So you wouldn't normally be able to, in any other business, turn someone away based on the fact they have bipolar disorder and they're hospitalized. But in within the mental health world, you are able to pick things like that. So I felt like that was me being stigmatized in that situation. But the question really becomes, what can you do about it? I mean, you can always leave a mental health provider. If they're doing other things that are misconduct, you could potentially report it. Now, someone put in the chat, how do I let go of the hurt feeling of being stigmatized? I know I can't do anything about it, but the hurt gets stuck in rumination, which makes it feel even worse. Um, uh, and someone else said it seems like the people who need the most help get stigmatized. So let me answer that question about what you do if with the hurt of feeling stigmatized. I have an expression. It's not a very it probably won't make me very popular, but I like to think of it as once something painful has happened to me, that pain is in me forever and it's endless. It's not going to go away. I learned the hard way that, no matter what I do to try to make my life better, that pain is still with me. And so, you talked about the hurt getting stuck into a rumination. Um, I have a book that I recommend that was recommended to me by my therapist about 5 years ago, and it has been really, really helpful. It's called Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, and it teaches acceptance and commitment therapy. So for me, acceptance and commitment therapy has been really helpful. Acceptance and commitment therapy is very different from cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT in the following way. In CBT, for those of you who have seen it, when you have a ruminative thought that you think is dysfunctional, you argue with the thought and try to replace it with a different thought. In ACT, you don't bother to argue with the thought. You just notice that you're having the thought and you maybe ask yourself, why is this coming up for me now? Why am I feeling this now? Why today? What's happening? And you try to learn about yourself through the thought instead of trying. So I have been doing that, the ACT, and it's been really, really useful for me to, understand a little more why I'm ruminating from the stigma, and it does reduce it. And I also just accept that, it's a big part of my life that, when I socialize, like I mentioned earlier, I got nervous that someone wasn't answering me. It's just part of what's going on. Um, the book is what's linked in the chat. Jen put it in there. Get out of your mind and into your life. And I have no affiliation with them. It's just, I just appreciate the lessons I learned. So the last thing I'm going to talk about here before we do questions um, is tools. And I want to share some tools with you. And the tools that I want to orient you to, there's something called the Stigma and Conflict Resolution Resource Group, which I launched this year with New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, with some support as well from the New York State Office of Mental Health. It's free. It has resources to help people learn skills for using conflict resolution when you are seeking support, like someone asked for earlier, when you are pursuing disability accommodations, and when you're overcoming rejection. And what I'm going to do now is walk through some of the resources for rejection. So that is what we're going to talk about now for tools. Now, it's also produced by my company. My company's MH Mediate. The platform that my company has for helping with things like this is called MindQuity. And on my website for MindQuity, you can go out and access these resources as well for free. And I'm also doing work to connect with dispute resolution professionals to serve as conflict coaches. So if you're looking to, get extra support beyond these resources, you could hire a conflict coach who would sit with you and help you go through those 5 C's and help you figure out what your next steps might be in a conflict related to stigma. It's called mental health empowerment conflict coaching. That's what I called it. So that's something I'll share a link with you as well. Um, and now I'm going to show you what the 5 rejection tools are, and I'll show you a little bit about what's in them. So the first tool is clarify whether rejection occurred. So remember that first C is clarify. We want to figure out, do we know for sure we were rejected? Decide whether to speak up, seek support, reorient after rejection, and address stigma and discrimination. These are the 5 tools that we have for rejection. Each one is 1 to 2 pages long. It comes with a short video explaining the tool. And it really shows you that there's a lot that you can possibly do when you think that there is rejection happening. So the first thing is we clarify whether rejection occurred. This is a picture of the worksheet for clarifying whether rejection occurred. I'm going to zoom in on some of it. We're not going to go through all of it. We don't have time. But you start by listing observable behaviors that you've seen. Then ask yourself, what are you assuming? Then consider alternative explanations. And then ground your next steps. And then remember the final thought, which is not all distance is rejection. And not all rejection means you did something wrong. This worksheet is meant to support good decision making rooted in both self-respect and openness. So the idea here is just, it can feel really, really intense when you're thinking you may have been rejected or you're rejected. Let's sort through it and look at what happened. So if we're looking at clarifying whether rejection occurred and listing behaviors, here's some examples of behaviors that you may have experienced from the other person. And by the way, sometimes it's easy to know if rejection occurred. I have one organization that earlier this year sent me a letter terminating me. So that was very clear that rejection occurred. But sometimes it's harder to know if you're being rejected. These resources are useful for either thing. It could be especially helpful, when it's not clear. So what might be rejection? Not responding to messages or emails, taking a long time to reply, canceling or avoiding meetings, not inviting me to events, changing the subject when I bring up certain topics, being distant or short in conversations, no longer showing appreciation or warmth, blocking or unfollowing on social media, speaking negatively about me to others, explicitly saying they don't want contact. That's what I just said before. And you could add your own things in here as well. So the idea here, maybe you just realize I'm not being rejected. Maybe you realize, that you don't have a lot of observable behaviors and you just have a sense that you're feeling a little off with the relationship. Or maybe now you realize, hey, these things are happening and I feel like I'm experiencing rejection. And thank you. I see someone said, I love this. Any questions or comments, please keep them coming. We got that step 2. What are you assuming? So complete the sentence. I believe they're rejecting me because blank, and then ask what feelings are driving this belief. Is it fear, hurt, confusion? What evidence supports my assumption, and what evidence could contradict it? So remember, it's just helpful to just do this kind of deeper look at it to get some clarity about what you think is happening. So those are some examples from that worksheet. We're not going to go through the whole thing. The next worksheet is deciding whether to speak up. So we have another worksheet here that walks through thinking about how do I feel, what's the context, weigh the pros and cons, make a decision, and then if you choose to speak, consider what you're going to say to them. So it walks you through that whole process. I'm just going to show you another part real quick. Weigh the pros and cons. So some examples of reasons to speak up. I want clarity and closure. I value the relationship. I think they might not be aware of the impact. I want to affirm my feelings and experience. Some reasons to hold back might be I don't feel emotionally safe or ready. It may make things worse. I need more time to understand what I want. This relationship may not be worth repairing. So these are the kinds of things that you might think through. while deciding to speak up. Now, someone asked for coping skills and being diplomatic in the face of all the misinformation swirling around me, both at work and among family members. I put that prompt here because I wanted to highlight this whole deciding to speak up. Coping skills are going to be different for different people at different times, right? If you think there's misinformation of stigma swirling around at work and amongst family because someone has a mental health diagnosis and now people are acting inappropriately, and you're trying to be diplomatic, you're going to have a lot of decisions to make about when you speak up and when you don't. I don't have an answer for you because different people are different. Obviously, if you look at me, you heard my bio, you've heard me speak. I'm very, very, very open. I speak up a lot. I generally try to speak up when there is an advocacy purpose attached, but I think that there's a lot of times in my life I'm doing mental health advocacy, so I wind up speaking a lot. Different people are going to have different priorities about what makes sense for them to possibly say, you know what, I care so much about educating people and changing what's going on that I can't let this slide. I'm going to go speak to them about the misinformation. Or I care so much about being diplomatic and making sure that my work life and home life is as comfortable as possible and I don't have any more strain there. So I am going to just not bring this up. So that's going to be personal decisions for anyone. Then we have this section on seeking support with another worksheet. You should know that it begins with a note that we have a whole other set of modules that come before the rejection modules, which you all can access, all about figuring out how to seek support. So I highly recommend those. It's not the topic today, but it's a very important skill set to know how to approach seeking support. So we've got this worksheet here. One key thing I wanted to highlight from that worksheet, since we're just going to show a few pieces, is making sure that before you seek support, you identify what you need right now. Are you looking for someone just to listen to you? Are you looking for comfort and encouragement? Are you looking for someone to help you process things? Are you looking for distraction or humor? Are you looking for a reminder of your value, helping you through the next steps? Part of seeking support is being clear about what you're asking. So that's something, again, that you can access those other tools for help. But it's really useful to have that when you go seek support, so you can tell the person what would help you. Someone wrote, when do I admit to myself and others that I will not be getting better? I have a chronic illness and that it's not personal if I have a flare or cannot function or do as others wish. How do I tell friends to stop feeling abandoned by me because I have an invisible illness? Even when I'm hospitalized for a suicide attempt, they feel like they can chastise me for taking a vacation and not doing my real world duties. So this is, it sounds like a difficult situation. And, as a lot of these have been, it seems like this fits into seeking support from these friends. What I'm reading here is I don't want to reject these friends. I want to find a way to communicate with them about what's going on with me and what I need from them in terms of support, so they don't feel abandoned by me. And so I would suggest that going through that support seeking module will be helpful. That's not what we're going over right now. So, but I thought it was useful to bring it up here with support, so you can see the connection about this. To me, is a support seeking question. Someone else shared, I'd like to explore how rejection connects to communication breakdowns, especially in community or workplace settings where people avoid difficult conversations instead of addressing them. I'm curious about learning more practical strategies to recognize emotional shutdowns, both in myself and others, before they turn into full disconnection. So I processed that as well as a support thing, because this is a situation where people were avoiding difficult conversations instead of feeling comfortable seeking support about them to connect. That's how I took it. And that's where I'm connecting it here. And again, suggesting that it could be a good time to look at those support modules. Now, somebody asked a question just now in the chat, does bullying fit into the stigma arena? The answer there is yes, it does, because someone could be bullied for a lot of different reasons. If the bullying is due to some kind of negative attitude towards a person's mental health problem, then the bullying would be due to stigma. And a lot of times, the way they measure stigma is they'll ask people questions. Would you date this person? Would you marry this person? Would you work with this person? Would you be friends with this person? And they try to see if people have an attitude of not wanting to be associated with someone who has a mental illness. And that's considered stigma, that they are socially undesirable and they're social exclusion. So that would also be considered bullying if that's happening in certain contexts. Somebody else asked in the chat, can you explain elephant in the room and how that relates to social exclusion or stigma? Maybe. I know elephant in the room as a general expression. So if you have more you can say on what you mean by elephant in the room, I'm happy to reapproach that question, because otherwise I'm just talking about it from the phrase, the elephant in the room is something people aren't saying, but is directing what's happening. So just broadly, if that's what you meant, people may be they may be excluding you without saying why. And the elephant in the room is they think you have a mental health problem, and that's very stigmatizing. But sometimes it's hard to prove why that happened, because a lot of times people who are rejected because of stigma, no one says it. They say something else. So if you're getting fired because of mental illness stigma, they may want to say instead that it's your performance and that's why you're fired, because they don't want to look like they did the stigma. And so that could be a situation where, sometimes it's very difficult to show that you had experienced stigma because the people are trying not to say it. And that may be what you're talking about. But if you have something more specific about elephant in the room, please let me know. So this next thing is my favorite thing that has really changed my life with rejection. It's reorienting after rejection. And I'm going to explain to you this 3-step model of what I do when I experience rejection that I think is really, really useful. And I'll share some more resources about it as well when I send the handouts. And I hope it can help everybody here, because it's really changed my life. And the model is the 3 R's: respect, reply, reorient. So the first thing is respect their decision, even if you know their reason is stigmatizing or wrong. So if someone says to me, Dan, I think you are an unstable, mentally ill person, and you're not fit to be a part of our group anymore, and we don't want to speak to you, goodbye. Now, I might be tempted to argue with them and say, this is disgusting. This is stigma. This is wrong. How dare you? You can't do this. You can't do this because I will not let you treat me like I am these crazy stereotypes. That is not okay to do, because even if what they're saying is the most awful, illegal stuff, they've now told you, I don't want to speak to you anymore. So respect means respecting, okay, this person's indicated they don't want to speak to me. I'm not going to contact them again. Now, this is especially important, I think, unfortunately, if for me with my bipolar disorder, if I follow up with the person and say, I'd like to convince you I'm a good person, will you talk to me? Every time I follow up, they may be trying to say I'm a stalker, harasser, etc., with stereotypes related to the bipolar disorder. So to protect myself from a lot of things, I'm going to say, hey, what you said is wrong, but I hope you change your mind one day. We speak another time. I hear you saying you're not going to talk to me. I won't talk to you. I'll move on. And that's the next R, is reply. You reply one last time to confirm you're following the boundary. So I'll say to them, from what I could tell, from what you've said here, you're saying you don't want to talk to me. So I'm letting you know I'm not going to talk to you. That's not my position. If you want to talk to me, you can let me know, but I'm not going to contact you. Here's how I'm going to move forward with the situation. Take care. It confirms you're following the boundary. And then the last thing is reorient. Reorient to new opportunities to fill your life with support and activities instead of wallowing. That means that right away, the second the rejection happens, I've now said, okay, I accept that you rejected me. I don't agree with what you said, but I'm going to reply once to let you know I'm listening, and I'm going to move on. And now I'm going to go contact other people to spend time with and talk to, instead of trying to talk to someone who has been treating me like this. In my career, I have had so many benefits to doing this. And in my personal life, because what happens is, instead of privately struggling and fighting a situation that I can't control, I now get connected to new people. So I mentioned at the start of this program that my book has been republished by DRI Press. I have had problems with the American Bar Association because of my advocacy work. They are the organization that terminated me. Because I decided right away to reorient and look for help, I then connected with the people who decided that they would publish the book instead. And now I have a new publisher for the book. That's one of just, infinite examples of how great it is to do this reorienting. And the greatest part is, instead of sitting around and being stuck, it feels like I go and fill my life with a lot more meaningful connections, friends, and people. Someone asked, was I a lawyer? No, anyone can join the American Bar Association as an affiliate member. And mediators are often attorneys, but they're often not. And because I was a non-attorney mediator, someone invited me to join the ABA, and wanted to include me. So I got involved there. I was a co-chair of a diversity committee there, representing disability diversity. I did a lot of good work there. But some of my complaints about stigma led people to complain about me as a bully, actually, when someone asked if there's bully connections. So that's the other side of it, where I didn't even think of it before, but people can accuse someone who's complaining about stigma of being a bully. I'll share an article that I published on this, if people are interested in more about the story. There was a question here: how do you deal with stigma when people won't respond to you on social media? Do people with mental health conditions get ignored or dismissed on social media regularly? I'm not a big user of social media, but I would follow the same approach that I just outlined. Respect the decision that they're not talking to you. Reply once if that's appropriate, or don't reply, and go reorient and look for other ways. That's what I think is most helpful. I do have a colleague who has felt like they were ignored a lot on LinkedIn because of their known mental health condition. And so I do know that it's a serious issue, that there are times that, we may be experiencing different treatment on social media, I want to validate that that's a thing that happens. Somebody asked, I'm underemployed since being furloughed during the pandemic, and I'm job hunting. As AI changes our world and the ATS makes job hunting more complicated, I would greatly appreciate advice and tools to handle the frequent rejection we all experience during job hunts, especially advice that will help with being resilient and graceful and ready to move on to the next job application, as recovering with hope and determination is key to moving on. Thank you. So I want to say that the 3 R's applies there as well, with this respect, reply, reorient, that is a plan. I also would say, I think it's important when you're in a situation like a job hunt or looking for a romantic partner, to remember that, you're looking for sometimes what feels like a needle in a haystack. So to go in expecting to have a lot of hay to sort through before you find the needle. So that, having that expectation of it may be a while, which it sounds like this person does, can be helpful as well. And there's also rules about mental health and job seeking about what they're allowed to ask you. So we're not talking about that now, but I feel like I should bring it up, that you should know that people are not allowed to ask you a lot of questions about your mental health. My family members are afraid of being around my daughter, who is schizophrenic and bipolar. I wanted to share this here as well. Unfortunately, I've had some challenges even within my own family or with my in-laws. And I still think the respect, reply, reorient model is really useful. Remember that, the way I described it, you're saying, I accept your choice to reject me. I'm still here. And in the meantime, I'm going to go look for other stuff to fill my life with. That means you're still available to your family, but you're not getting caught up in the cycle of what's going on. Somebody asked in the chat, Can you prove stigma with potential employers because of your mental health condition? And can you prove that employers are screening you? The answer is yes, maybe. And it really depends on how they're doing it. So there are times that people don't realize that it is illegal to ask certain questions about mental health conditions, and they put it on their screening forms. And so there have been court cases where people have used like personality tests that can tell if someone has a psychopathology, is what's called, so mental health problems, and that's been illegal. If you can see that there is some actual written material where they're doing the screening, you might be able to do something about it. And in fact, I'm not talking about it in this presentation, but I have gotten many, many, many organizations to change their rules and guidance materials because they did write down to screening out people with mental health problems. Just today, I was on the phone with general counsel from a court system where they had changed their documents that had asked inappropriate screening of parties who were in family mediation cases. There are, I see someone said there is a job asking for a personality test, and so I was turned off from applying. There are personality tests that are allowed. It depends on the type of test. So a lot of them are allowed, but some of them are not because some of them you can figure out from the test if someone has the criteria for a diagnosable disorder. So that's what the rule that came from the courts was you can do a personality test as long as it doesn't show you if someone has a diagnosable disorder that's a disability. The last thing we had here, someone had asked earlier about this as well, was legal resources, addressing stigma and discrimination. This is a worksheet that walks through how you can spot stigma, microaggressions, invasion of privacy, inappropriate screening criteria, or disparate treatment. And then it links to my Mental Health Safe Projects page to a page about how do you report discrimination and look into those kinds of issues. So people who are looking into that, we've got that covered with that handout. Someone said I just had my hours cut way back because my apparent medical condition by the person I helped due to lack of production. How can I talk to them and do I have any rights? Unfortunately, I do want to be realistic with everybody. It can be very, very difficult to pursue some of these disability cases. So it depends on the situation. I'm not a lawyer. I can't advise you legally, but if someone ever wants, I mean, I'm going to give you all my email address. It's going to be on the handouts as well. Feel free to email me. I can share whatever information I can to be helpful. But again, I'm not an attorney. I can't advise you, and there's different facts for different cases. But it can be difficult sometimes. That's why I recommend people use these conflict resolution tools to talk to people and try to be collaborative because it can be very difficult to have an adversarial disability conflict. So my email is dan@mhmediate.com. You can all email me with any questions anytime. I can stop now and we can just have live questions. I do have some other questions that were shared in advance that are, in the slideshow as well. So if we run out of questions live, um, I can go back to that. But my email is dan@mhmediate.com. We'll get the handout to everyone. And now I'll stop this so we can do some questions.